Well, thank you so much for the introduction, Karen. So yes, my name is Roxy Etta, and I am the Child Development and Parenting State Specialist at UW-Madison's Division of Extension. And I'll give you a little bit of background about me. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. So the picture on the, I like to tell stories with pictures. So the picture on the left is of me doing research at the UW-Madison Preschool Laboratory. And throughout graduate school, I conducted research in the Cognitive Development and Media Lab about the effects of screen time on children and families. And the picture on the right is of me with my son at my PhD graduation. So hopefully this convinces you that I know my stuff. And in this slide, I just want to say from the get-go that I am not like a full-blown like anti-screen person. I think that screens can be great tools for learning and connection and entertainment for families. And I'm really passionate about teaching people about the good of screens with the not so good and figuring out how to find a healthy balance. So the picture on the left is from an article I did for the Wisconsin State Journal with my twin daughters. They're much older now. And the picture on the right is of me being recorded for Good Morning America to feature Miss Rachel, who is like a YouTube sensation. If you have a young child, you probably know who Miss Rachel is. And I talked all about the benefits of screen time for toddlers. So I hope that, or how to make screen time beneficial for toddlers. So I hope this convinces you that I love what I do. And quickly before I dive in, I wanted to share a lot of what I'm talking about today is described in more depth in the Healthy Media Habits series that I co-created for the Prevention Board. So if you want to learn more about something that I talk about today, chances are that it could be in this curriculum. So I have the QR code there that takes you to the page if you'd like to save it for later. Otherwise, you can Google Healthy Media Habits Series Prevention Board and it'll pop right up. So in our time together today, I'm going to break down the state of young children and media right now. What is research showing us? We'll talk about why prevention is so important and why early habits matter and the role that parents and caregivers play, and strategies to help families mitigate or prevent what I like to call, what the field calls problematic media use and its effects on children. So let's talk first about the current state of media use, starting with young children. So research shows that by 2 years of age, 40% of children have their own tablet. By 8 years of age, 23% of children have their own phone. So almost a quarter of young children use devices for comfort at mealtime or to fall asleep for nap or at bedtime at night. 75% of parents do not use any tools or settings to manage their children's screen time, and 51% of parents do not restrict the types of content that their children have access to. And I want to draw attention to those last 2 points about parent mediation, because I think it's really important because looking at these numbers, you might think that parents don't care or are not worried about their children's media use, but actually that's not the case. Children's media use is one of the top concerns of parents today. They're really worried about kids' media use, but they don't feel empowered to take action on it. They feel overwhelmed by all of the possibilities and maybe feel like they can't meet the standards that they would hope for their family. So they're really overwhelmed even in the early years when it comes to screen time. So I would like to talk a little bit about what the research says on screens in early development. And I will say that this is rather nuanced. It depends on the individual child, the content that they're using, and the context that they're using it in. But I have some data here to share from the American Academy of Pediatrics' most recent policy statement that children under 18 months of age really have a difficult time learning from screens. So there is this sort of period of infancy toddlerhood where children, we call it the transfer deficit or the video deficit, where kids don't really learn well from screens alone. They have a really hard time transferring information from the 2D world to the 3D world. So they kind of don't trust video. They have a hard time connecting it. That symbolic representation isn't fully developed yet, which is why in the American Academy of Pediatrics recommendations, I'm sure that you've heard no screen time before 2 years of age. That was the old policy recommendation. I will talk a little bit more in a couple slides about the new policy recommendations that came out this year. The next piece of research I wanted to share is that high quality educational content for preschoolers can be beneficial. It can promote pro-social behaviors, language learning, and STEM learning. So what I mean by high quality educational content is things that are developed with kids in mind, ideally by a team of folks who know about child development, who maybe like are researching and piloting their work. Programs like Sesame Street, pretty much anything on PBS Kids is what I would consider high quality educational content for preschoolers. And the last piece is heavy screen use is associated with delays in multiple things. So in language, cognitive development, social emotional development, executive functioning skills, fine motor development, poorer sleep, less reading, and pretend play. So this is with using screens for hours per day. And for this next piece, I wanted to show how children's screen time increases with age. So the most common question that I get asked by parents, hands down, is how much screen time is too much? And looking at this graph of how many hours children spend on screens, it's understandable, I think, why people are asking questions about how many hours per day are appropriate because they feel like maybe it's too much. Also, when looking at this graph, it's very tempting, I think, to think that the goal should be to eliminate all screen time for kids, like get it to zero. But for many families, I think cutting out screen time completely is just really not realistic, and research shows it doesn't address the full picture. And I like to frame it more so as how media fits into a child's day, into their relationships, if it's allowing for the things that we know are important for their child development, like sleep and learning and play, and overall developmental, skills. That's what really matters, not just time on screen. So the reality of this is just a little bit more complex than hours per day. But at the same time, anything that kids are doing for this many hours per day is something that we really should have our eye on and be curious about, especially when we're talking about the older, so like tweens and teens, who some of the most recent research shows that they are using screens for about 8.5 hours per day, which is more than a full-time job. So rather than worrying about the quantity of media, I really like to focus on a few other aspects in the big picture of the quality of a child's day. So like I said, the most frequently asked question I get is how many minutes, how many hours per day? And I think that if you consider a kid's entire day, and ask, are they getting enough of all the things that research shows us that we know matter for child development, like getting face-to-face interaction, being read to, getting enough sleep every night and for naps, having mealtime with family, having some outdoor time, free play. If they're getting all of those things in their day, there really isn't enough time for there to be excessive screen use. And I also just want to have a caveat that this is talking about like a typical day. Of course, there are days where like a family member is sick or it's a travel day when like this might look very different, and that's okay. But I'm talking about like in general, what does the rhythm of a child's day look like? So I think the better question to ask instead of how many minutes per day is whether or not screens are crowding out other important activities. So in this graph, you see that perhaps like this might be more of like a tween or teen, but like reducing the amount of sleep that they get every day because screens are crowding out. Maybe not participating in extracurriculars, going outside, because different forms of media are crowding out those other important parts of the day. And just this year in February, I believe, the American Academy of Pediatrics released a new policy statement on children and media, and they're taking this same approach of like considering what's being crowded out, like what are kids getting in their day. And so they've really steered away from specific time recommendations because parents were getting really hung up on it. And they research found that those recommendations, like if parents felt like they couldn't abide by them, they got really discouraged and sort of like threw their hands up, like I can't meet that expectation, like just like it's a loss. So they've steered away from those specific time recommendations, although they do provide like examples of how many hours per day might work for a family. They just don't want that to be the main focus. So they have this new, and I have a QR code on the screen if you'd like to scan to, that links to this policy statement. It's actually a pretty short read, and I think it's really well done. So now the American Academy of Pediatrics is talking about how children's media use and the outcomes of media use are affected by multiple layers. And at the center is the child. So that an individual child's temperament, their emotions, their personality, their interests all shape how they uniquely respond to media. The next circle is caregivers, so how parents and caregivers use media themselves, the routines that they set for their children, and the stress that they carry all affect the child's experience. And then beyond that is the digital ecosystem, so that's like things more out of our control, like the apps, how they're designed, games, how shows are made for kids, social media platforms, notifications, design choices, things like that. And then finally, the last layer is the systems and structures. So schools, community norms, government policies, childcare policies, economic factors, right, that all shape what's possible within those contexts within. So I really like this visual. I like the way that they are framing this, and it shows why supporting healthy media use is a collective effort, and about it's not like just on the sole shoulders of parents and families. It's not just talking about family rules, it's about all of these layers working together to support kids' well-being. So why do early habits matter? Research tells us that the habits children form around media use can have ripple effects into their future. So problematic media use can start early in childhood. And when I say problematic media use, I'm talking about patterns where screen time starts to form patterns that interfere with everyday functioning, right? So like getting in the way of sleep, getting in the way of school, getting in the way of important activities regularly. And these patterns can and do start early in families. So I have some signs here of what problematic media use might look like. So, and just if someone has one of these signs, it doesn't mean that they are experiencing problematic media use, but it's just something to consider, some signs to consider. So shifts in behavior, physically, emotionally, socially, or functionally, having lower grades due to too much screen use, being emotionally withdrawn, avoiding in-person social connections, important activities are being crowded out, like sleep and exercise, and screens are the default way to calm emotions. So having a really hard time regulating or calming down without the presence of a screen. And I have up here the terms problematic media use and addiction are often used interchangeably. Like people will often say to me, my kid is addicted to screens. And this table summarizes why I use the term, and really the field uses the term problematic media use. So they reflect two really different conditions. And for most children, we really are not seeing true behavioral addiction. We're seeing media use that has begun to interfere with healthy functioning. And while behavioral addiction can and does occur, it really represents a more severe end of the spectrum. And problematic media use is like the broader term that better reflects the challenges that many families and children are encountering with media use. So I just have a few things that I'll point out here that I just think are important. So I just like the phrase problematic media use, especially because I think it helps families and folks who are experiencing problematic media use feel like they can take action on it. Using the term addiction is often stigmatizing, and it might suggest a permanent or like really hard to fix problem, versus problematic media use sort of recognizes that the media design is like kind of more to blame than the individual person, and it makes it just seem like a problem that can be resolved with the right information and support. So just wanted to have that little caveat in there. So when we think about media habits, it really helps to imagine a ripple in a pond. So small habits that happen early on can create effects that continue to grow over time. So I have some like just like a little story with some examples here. So for example, a toddler might routinely fall asleep at night every night with an iPad. And then a few years later, that same child maybe is still in the habit of falling asleep with a screen and maybe staying up too late watching YouTube videos. So problematic media use habits really tend to stick and grow over time. And by the teen years, it can look like maybe hours of gaming that crowd out sleep and homework and friendships and family time, with these patterns really rippling forward. But there is area for intervention. There's hope, right? It's not like if a child like has a not so healthy media habit, it's not something that can't be broken. When caregivers really help set healthy routines or readjust when things start to go off path, kids are much more likely to stay on a positive trajectory. Okay, for this last part, I want to talk about the role that parents and caregivers play. So I'm sure that as many of you suspect or like can guess based on how I've been framing this, that prevention of problematic media use really starts in the earliest years. Children learn first by watching what adults do. They copy what adults see and what's modeled to them. So parents and caregivers really do have a strong role to play in modeling. And that means that screens matter even before kids use them themselves. When caregivers reach for a device during meals or during conversations, it really sends a powerful, unspoken, but really powerful message about what's important. And over time, these small moments really add up if they're repeated over and over again. So early routines, whether it's screens at bedtime or phones put aside for family time, really become norms in the family. And those norms shape how kids will use technology, how they will think about technology as they grow. And I wanted to put like just a note in here that there's a lot of new research coming out on what they're coining the term technoference. So when screens are getting in the way of everyday interactions, I'm sure you've seen this before. Everyone is likely a victim of technoference, where you're having an in-person interaction with someone and like a notification buzzes on your phone, or maybe you just like have an impulse to pick up your phone and you get disconnected from that in-person connection. And there is research coming out on the effects of regular technoference on young kids and how there's the research is still very new on this, but what I've seen so far is it's showing that it's related to more emotional outbursts from kids, right? Because they're making more bids for attention that aren't getting replied to. It's causing more frustration in parents because they're trying to multitask and getting frustrated that they're getting interrupted. So really, it's something just to like keep an eye on and that the field is learning more about. And this is like the biggest, like the most hit home part of the my presentation of strategies for how to promote healthy media use, because there's action that can be taken. So I'll give you a few key actions that you can take in communicating with families and interacting with families. And I have some suggested conversation starters around each of the action items to give people sort of a starting point, because I I know firsthand that talking about media use with families is often a very sensitive topic. People feel like perhaps they're going to be judged, or that they um, maybe are embarrassed of their family's media habits, or they feel like it's personal. So a lot of these areas of action that I'll talk about are taking the approach of curiosity rather than like telling families what to do. And the American Academy of Pediatrics offers this really nice framework called the 5 Cs. And I will go ahead and put that in the chat right now if you would like to learn more. I really like how they frame the 5 Cs. They have some really great handouts on their website. They have posters that you can order for free and hang up in your office or places where families gather. So I'll go through these and I will add that I added in my own 6th bonus C, and I'll share in just a minute. So the first C is child. And because kids, like I said, are all different, we all know this, all kids are unique, they don't each have the same risks and benefits from media. And media use should really match the child's age, their needs, their temperament. So what you can do is encourage parents to observe how their child responds to media, help parents tailor media rules to their unique child's regulation abilities, the amount of sleep that they need, their social development, right? And support parents in recognizing the signs of problematic media use of like maybe overstimulation, irritability, dependence on screens. So I have a few sample questions to like sort of start this conversation with families. So like, what's your child's personality like? How does this influence the types of media that they use? And how does your child handle the end of screen time? Like, is it a full-blown tantrum? Like, what does that look like for your kid? And the next C that I have that is content. So it's important to note that I expect the products that children use, like food or toys, to be tested for safety, but there aren't any safety regulations around children's technology design right now. And this means that kids are using platforms and apps that might have been designed without them in mind, might have been designed for adults. And I just really like to point that out because there really is no regulating body on like the app store for kids apps or for YouTube Kids. And the quality of shows and apps that children use matters as much, if not more, in my opinion, than the quantity that they're using screens. So helping caregivers choose high quality educational apps and shows, like I said, PBS Kids is free and available. There's a website, there's an app that you can download to a phone or a tablet or your TV, and there's lots of shows and there's lots of games that they have available that are designed by people who care about child development, and it's designed with learning in mind. Helping parents find age-appropriate content and really discouraging violent content. There's a lot of research on the effects of violent content on kids, like dating back to the 80s, I want to say. And kids really they observe violent content and they mimic that content. So it's something I like to point out. Questions you can ask: what types of shows or apps does your child usually watch or use? How do you decide if a show or app is a good fit for your child? And next is context. So how, why, and with whom media is used really changes the outcome. So what is the setting? Who's there? So helping caregivers prioritize co-viewing and co-playing. So co-viewing is when an adult is watching a video or a show or playing a game with a child. And then the next point is to avoid background TV. There's a lot of research out there on the effects of having the TV on when no one is watching it, like all day. A lot of families do that, like for the comfort of having, noise in the background. But we have lots of research to show that TV that's on in the background all day for young children really interferes with their play, it interferes with parent-child interaction. There's less play, less high-quality play. And the last part is to model positive digital behaviors, which I talked a little bit about earlier, but that's really, really important context for families. And questions you can ask are, When your child is using media, are you usually able to watch or talk with them about it and like understand that obviously parents can't like sit down and watch every show or play every game with their kid, but they can talk to them about it beforehand. They can ask them a question about what they saw or what they learned afterward, just like finding some way to engage with the child about surrounding that experience. And does your phone use ever affect time with your child? Like that could be like that one might be a little bit trickier to sort of approach. Like maybe that would there would need to be some questions that come up before that, but like really trying to ask people like, do you feel like you're using your phone like makes you more frustrated when you're hanging out with your kiddo? And then calm. So all kids need to learn strategies for how to manage strong emotions or to fall asleep at night. And sometimes families use media as their main go-to strategy for calming children because it works. And if this is the case, talking to other people about it really can be helpful. And I would say that a caveat here is that screen time looks really different for families with neurodivergent children, and media might actually really influence children's brains differently in this regard. And many parents report that um, screens are an incredible tool for calming children, especially those on the autism spectrum. And this this research is still very new, and it's there. I don't have like top recommendations to share about that, but I just wanted to make a point about it. And helping caregivers encourage screen-free bedtime routines can really help with calm, creating non-screen calming routines. So asking families, do you notice any changes in your child's mood or sleep when they use screens close to bedtime? The general recommendation is trying to avoid screens an hour per bed for kids and adults because of blue light and that stimulation. Reducing the production of melatonin, which is like a signal to the brain that it's time to get sleepy and fall asleep. And when your child is upset, tired, or bored, do you often offer them a screen? And then the next C that I have here is crowding out. And I talked about this a little bit already, but what do we know is important for child development? Keep prioritizing that. Media use should really not replace those developmentally important activities. And screens in the early years aren't just for entertainment, they can really crowd out, especially sleep, I would say, and and lead to missed experiences. So helping parents build a daily rhythm with screen time can be really beneficial. I'm like really entrenched in this field. So like I have like a really specific media routine that I've used with my kiddos. It's changed over time. But just like suggesting the idea of having like a rhythm that's followed, like maybe screens only after dinner time for an hour, like rather than it having it be any time during the day whenever kids ask for it, but sort of sticking to a rhythm or creating a rhythm with your family can be something that's really life-changing for families. So building a daily rhythm that prioritizes those things that we know are important for healthy development, establishing tech-free zones in the home. So I really like to recommend no TVs in the bedroom and no phones at the dinner table. And then delay when children own their own online connected devices, so like tablets and phones. Um, I hear a lot from families regret about getting their child their own device and wishing they could take it back and turn back the clock. And it's sort of like once you I mean, you definitely can take it back, but I think that families just sort of wish that they would have thought about it a little more. And there are resources online of like, when is my child ready for a phone? It can be really easy for families, like phone companies make it really affordable to add another line. And they're like, hey, you can get a free iPhone and add another line for this amount of money. And they're like, wow, that's a really good deal. I should probably take them up on that. But it is something that like is it's never too early to start thinking about. And I have some questions here. What are your child's favorite off-screen activities? Does your family have any screen-free areas in your home? What are your family's no phone times during the day? And I also will say that there might be like a lot of kids saying that like I'm bored or like families trying to figure out what to do when they're trying to build a daily rhythm and sort of take back that time that was getting crowded out. But that having boredom, tolerating boredom, um, having that shift might be a little challenging at first, but it's really important for developing creativity and self-regulation skills. And the last C that I have is communication. So, talking with children about media to build understanding and empathy and trust. Talk to kids about media early and often. Have regular conversations, open and honest about family media use. Like, when my kids were really young, I was talking to them when they were like 2 years old about like an ad that would pop up on a video that they were watching and explaining to them what an ad is and what it's trying to get you to do. Um, and as kids get older, you can have more advanced conversations, like talking with your tween or teen about social media and how it makes you feel, or things that you saw that you didn't like and what you're going to do about that. And then I also added in checking in with children daily about how they're feeling. Um, and the bottom line really is to talk early, talk often about screens. But beyond media, having daily conversations about how they're doing and what's going on in their lives is hugely preventative for problematic media use. So some questions that I have on here is, do you talk with your child about what they're seeing on screens? What tech boundaries does your family have at home, or what technology rules do you have at home? And how do you regularly check in with your child and have conversations about how they're doing? And obviously this will look very different at different ages. So to wrap up, I have that this like last slide that this is a really unprecedented time in parenting, and parents are feeling really overwhelmed by media use, and they need someone that they are craving someone to talk to about it, someone to trust, to go to for guidance. And tech companies are really largely to blame for the current problems that families are facing, not families. It's not like their children are experiencing problematic media use because their parents, it's solely that their parents don't have good rules for them. Um, they and parents really shouldn't have to bear this alone. This really is, I think, can be framed more as like a community health problem, and we can help set community norms to support and reduce the current like youth mental health crisis for the next generation. And the change that we want to see in kids really comes from early prevention rather than trying to intervene once problems have already come up in tween teen years. And I think that this really is a community issue that requires collective action. So I love talking with groups like this and like sort of helping to like have people start conversations with folks and really start to think about like how do we as a community want to shape media norms? And also that the last point is that parents really aren't powerless in this. Like they have things that they can do to try to set up their kids for healthy media habits and keep them safe in more online spaces. There are actions that they can take. But really, it's like it's really wonderful. And parents have told me time and time again that they're craving more of this like community support, people being on the same page, using the same language, having shared expectations and norms. And that's the last slide that I have for you all. I have my a QR code here for I do Badger Talks on this topic, so for a presentation and workshop requests. I also am going to drop into the chat. I have an upcoming webinar in a couple weeks if anyone would be interested, all about phone ban policies. So what families can think about when it comes to phone bans, what teachers and school administrators might be curious about or looking for guidance on. And that's where I'll stop sharing. Thank you all for your time, and I will be in a work group later today.
Awesome. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much, Dr. Etta. I'm going to quickly put up one slide here before we transition to our next speaker. The DCF and other agencies in the state have just updated the early learning and development guidelines. It's pretty exciting because it's the first time in 20 years that this has happened. And it's time now to invite public review of this draft. Any comments you make, you do not have to review the entire document, but all comments will help improve clarity, usability, navigation, and consistency of this guideline. The document is really thorough, and I particularly appreciated that the authors have a page on digital media and technology use in early childhood. That's early on in the document, so go look for that. The deadline for reviewing is August 21st, and there will be a link in the chat where you can access this. And so as we transition from the early years into the next age group, adolescent development, well-being and technology, where is that intersection? We are very pleased to have Dr. Gabriel Velez. He is an associate professor from Marquette University, and we are going to hear about his work that is 100%, maybe I'm exaggerating, but centered on youth voice. When I met with Dr. Velez, it was so clear that youth voice is at the center of his work. And again, I just want to remind everybody to please put questions that you have for Dr. Velez in the chat. If we can get to them, we will, but also jot those down and take those into the small group discussion that he will lead. So anyway, Dr. Velez, let's pick up on this idea of reframing things from the youth perspective and to incorporate their voice in all of this technology associated work. Will you just share with us what your perspective is on that and the work that you do?
Yeah, so I'm glad to be here, Karen, with you and with everyone on this morning. I think, what I would start with and say is that I'm a developmental psychologist, and my interest in, if I get into the kind of the academic weeds, is focused on how young people make sense of things that they experience. So, I've done a lot of research on COVID-19, restorative justice, and now AI, and they're very different topics, but the central focus in each of those is like, what does it mean to be a young person thinking about these ideas that sometimes we as adults say, oh, have these benefits, or oh, have these, negative impacts, or we look at, statistical data and outcomes which matter, but we're not really getting into like what's the fundamental kind of experience, what's going on for these young people in these settings. And I think that really matters for a number of reasons, but the thing I'll put kind of front and center is I think that often, as adults who are in mental health or educational spaces, our aims are really to help support young people. But that doesn't mean that that's what's coming across, right? And that's the kind of the fundamental thing that I think we need to get their perspective about. And there are many examples we can think of, and some, we're very attuned to, sometimes mental health services, right? If there's stigma around that, and if it's, the student or the young person is being asked to be a part of that, right? They might not experience that as supportive, right? They might experience that as outing them, making them different, uncomfortable, whatever it be. But so I think that, it's such a fundamental question and a place we have to begin to really help us get to the place that we want, which is to help support them, right? To help them in supporting their thriving, their well-being. And if we don't have their voice in that, we're not going to get there, and we're also not going to do it in a way that respects, their dignity and their agency as well.
Well, I'm curious in the work that you've done with organizations, schools, maybe youth directly, what is there something that surfaces that you've discovered that's important to them and adults totally miss the boat when it comes to technology?
Yeah, the thing that I think is, what might it actually be serving them? How might it actually be serving them? Because I think we sometimes, we see these kind of negative impacts, or we think of the ways that it's doing harm to them, and sometimes they articulate those, right? And part of that too is the fact that they might be sitting with both of those. So, I spend a lot of time, as I was saying, with AI, so that comes the most to my mind. But a first example, right, is, a young person who feels a lot of stress about, let's say, getting the highest grades, right? Being achieving, getting into like a college, feeling that everything has to be perfect. Well, when that deadline is looming, or if they see someone next to them, right, on one assignment get an A and they know they used AI and they didn't and they get a B, right? Well, then what AI is doing is it's not just cheating, it's not just an out, it's not just skipping the struggle, it's actually helping them relieve something that's going on for them psychologically, emotionally, right? Something that's a challenge, that stress, that discomfort, right? And so, I think that is sort of a good example of what's going on there. The other part that I will mention too is just about, I was loving seeing some of the frameworks that were just presented, because as we think about that kind of like process, what goes in for young people and what they might be gaining out of these uses, there might also be negative things that they're struggling with, right? So that same young person I was just describing, they might also really feel like that ethically it's wrong what they're doing. And so they could be sitting with those two things, right? That I'm using AI and it's helping me and it's relieving the stress, but I'm also like deeply feeling this kind of ethical dissonance. Or, I know that, data centers in my neighborhood are causing all sorts of problems, or there's commotion. And so I also feel like I hate these tech companies, right? And so multiple things can be going on for the same young person or young people at the same time.
Wow, thank you. Yeah, and that the stress levels that come with that,
Hmm.
and we think a lot about that in our office. Um, so when we talked, you mentioned that you do deal with schools a lot. You consult with them, and there's a lot of discussion on the growing use of screens in schools. And so I'm just really curious if you could share any takeaways from those discussions that you've been having with schools, maybe what some schools are doing.
Yeah. And the first thing I'll say is a lot of what I just heard, the beginning part of this webinar really resonates, I think, with older kiddos as well, and older young people. I'd just say that I think one of the things I encourage schools to do is to have really open conversations, to have transparency, to have spaces where young people feel like they can talk about either how they're using screens, what their questions are, or not, not that it's going to be either stigmatized, pathologized, or, that they can't ask an awkward, uncomfortable question with something. And that's, I think, sort of a really critical foundation that I talk about with schools. And that to me comes back to what we know about development. We've known for a long time in development that relationships matter, that relationships are incredible protective factors. We don't have to leave that behind because we're so focused on the technology, right? In fact, I think it's good to say, let's return to this thing that we know really matters. Let's double down on building the relationships. And if we have that strong relationship, then we can start to move towards having a conversation about, okay, what's actually going on with this technology, with your use of it, with your screens, with your social media. Um, the second part that I'll mention that I talk with schools a lot about, and I sit with, and I'm a former educator, I sit with the fact that technology is such a problem in so many schools, right? And what I mean by that is particularly thinking of cell phones, but even, sometimes Chromebooks and other things, right? It's hard to know how students are using them, in what ways. And then, cell phones lead to all sorts of distractions and problems. At the same time, I think the idea of banning them and just pushing them entirely out of schools also kind of doesn't allow us to lean into what we can do effectively in schools, which is teach healthy habits, right? Because that same young person at 3:15 when that bell rings, right, they're going out into a world where very likely they will have access to that phone. They will have access to that computer. And if, our goal in working with young people is actually to develop, a healthy relationship with technologies, and that may be rejecting those technologies, that may be using them in certain ways, but ways that they have agency, that are helping them thrive, helping them accomplish the things they want to. Well, schools are a great place to actually teach that. And I say that again, it's easy to sit here. I'm actually at a psychological conference. It's easy to sit here and say that. It's really hard to do that. And I recognize that, but I also think we need to be open to that.
Yeah, and I'm curious for your comments on this dilemma. Parents want someone to set the rules. Schools want someone to set the rules. How do you respond to that tension when you're in these spaces with schools and having these conversations?
Yeah. I mean, I think a first thing is recognizing that this is hard, right? We don't have great answers for this. You know, as part of me feels like, I don't want to add anything else to schools. I don't want anything else to parents, right? There's so much stress, there's so much work. Anytime I go in and work or talk with a school, right, I'm really cognizant, and you hear, we're having to do this, right? And we're having to deal with that. And then things come up because we're talking about real people with real lives and real emotions, and complicate it. Um, and I do think there's not, on our side as researchers, we have to do more to figure out what are ways that we can effectively help support teachers in doing what I was just describing. Um, But I really do think, I mentioned before, but I would go back to that part about the relationships, because so much of it starts with being able to talk about it and being able to hear what's really going on and being able to share what's really going on, right? If I'm a teacher, to be able really to share with my students about the struggles that I have because of the tech and what I'm seeing out there, right? Like I'm seeing students, fight over social media because of it, right? Like if I have a space to share that with students, that's a whole different conversation than if I just snatch their phone every time that I see it. And I do think, there's a lot of good evidence that kind of punitive approaches, are not effective. And for two reasons. And I mentioned before, I do some work on restorative justice, right? And in that space, and that's more broadly on disciplinary kind of questions, punitive approaches don't help students learn. They don't help students thrive. They don't build safe, healthy communities. The second part of that is we just end up in a cat and mouse game, right? Like if I try and say I'm going to ban the use of AI in my class, well, students are going to find the latest tool to go around that, or, they're going to try and hide it, or they're going to put something into AI and then they're going to put it into a humanizer and then they're going to submit it to me. And so, I just think there's a lot of good evidence that trying to police young people in this space isn't going to be effective, but the relational kind of open transparency has potential.
Wow. You are speaking our love language when you talk about relationships with the Office of Children's Mental Health. So we want to transition now to AI. And to get the transition underway, I want to invite our researcher, Amy Marsman, to share some data with us. So Amy, please take it away.
Thank you, Karen. Okay, so first I wanted to ground this information in some definitions. Because technology and especially AI is developing so rapidly that I think some basics are helpful. And first, I just wanted to cover the fact that there are digital mental health tools all over the internet. It's everything from a meditation app on your phone to maybe a telehealth visit with your therapist. So real briefly, I want to take a look at these various tools. There are three basic categories that the national academies use to describe this continuum of care around digital mental health. They have self-help tools, therapy extenders, and then virtual care platforms. So again, like a self-help tool might be your meditation app that you have on your phone. Therapy extenders are a blended version, and virtual care platforms is more of the telemental health. The National Academies, they recently studied digital mental health and children's well-being. And that report was released in April of 2026, so just a few months ago. If you're interested, I've provided that title there. Essentially, what's important, I think, takeaway is that they concluded that over 30 years of research shows digital interventions can be effective in addressing mental health conditions. There's research showing that these approaches, these digital mental health approaches, are traditional to the gold standard treatments, particularly when the intervention includes a form of human support. So that last part is really important, that yes, these are effective mental health treatments, but especially when they come with a human support component. Then there are the AI tools that are proliferating. We have virtual assistants like Siri and Alexa, which provide information. And also we have companion bots, which provide supposedly companionship. And the way that many of us probably interact with AI right now in our daily lives is with cognitive offloading. This is when we use our devices to handle tasks so that we can free up our own brain space. We offload the task when we use a calculator instead of mentally calculating. We offload when we store numbers in our phone contact list rather than remembering somebody's actual phone number, which people my age and older understand how much space that still takes up in our brain. But we also offload when we're using GPS to navigate rather than memorizing a route or using an old-fashioned map. So it's incredibly convenient. As far as the research on effectiveness. We know that the digital mental health options can help, and they're effective treatment options, especially when they're paired with a human component. With AI, they haven't been around long enough for studies to definitively determine these are safe for kids or that these are effective mental health treatments. As Roxy had said earlier, things are released without any safety testing, especially for kids. So we don't know yet around the AI mental health tools. But we do have data on how many kids are using AI and their usage patterns over time. So I want to show some of those stats. This is according to Pew Research. They found that young adults are consistently more likely to have heard of AI than any other age group. The 18 to 29-year-old age group is also more likely to have adopted AI use. So they're both more aware and use AI more quickly than any other age group. And just a quick note that this survey was conducted a year ago in June of 2025. So AI use has most certainly grown since then. But at the time but in spring of 2025, when ChatGPT became the most downloaded app in the world. So that was a year ago. Pew also surveyed teens on their use of AI chatbots in the fall of 2025. And at that time, the majority were using AI to find information or to get help with their schoolwork. Again, that's the cognitive offloading. In this survey from fall of 25, only 12% of kids said they used the chatbot for emotional support or help. And then Common Sense Media conducted a survey in March of 26. So that was just a few months ago. We again see there's a big jump in usage. And here in their survey, 86% of kids said they use AI. And the older the teen, or the older the child, the more likely they're using it on a daily basis. So what was interesting in the Common Sense survey is that this is just a few months ago, kids said that they are mostly using AI for fun and for help with schoolwork. So we are seeing a shift towards the first use is around fun and entertainment, and the second use is around schoolwork and the cognitive offloading. So that is a shift in terms of what you find fun and what's entertaining, and it's moving away from the strict task-oriented AI. So this survey also found that kids who report feeling lonely tend to use AI more often. I also wanted to talk about this RAND survey. It's a separate and a larger national survey from 2025. Again, I'm pointing out the dates so you know that it can be already dated in this fast-moving world of AI. But at the time, researchers found that almost a fifth of young people were using AI chatbots for mental health advice, so about 20%. And this is higher than the 12% we saw in the Pew survey. So increased use overall and increased use for mental health or emotional support. RAND reported that in 2025, that 19% of young people were using it for mental health support, and that was a 50% increase from the year prior. Of those young people who used it for advice, that 92% said it was helpful. Overwhelmingly, they find it useful and helpful, but most of the users never told anyone that they do use AI chatbots for mental health. So it's a little secretive and still stigmatized. So we know that AI chatbots are being used by adolescents and by young adults. We know they're using it for emotional and psychological support and not just the cognitive offloading. And then I think that's
I think that's a
my stopping point, Karen.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah. And now I want to keep aiming with us all, but turn back to Gabrielle. And again, your work really focuses on youth and bringing them into these conversations. You talked a little bit about youth and AI earlier, and I'm wondering if you have anything to add to that could help us in this understanding.
Yeah, I mean, two things that I might say. One, I appreciate that background and context and the focus, and then as we were planning for this, we were going to talk about on how young people are engaging with AI in very different ways. I think in general, when we say AI, right, it's this broad umbrella. We all shake our heads, or we all sigh, or we all, have some sense of we're talking about the same thing, but it actually encompasses, really wide diversity, and that's important. And now any young person who goes onto social media, right, there's an AI element in there. They go onto Snapchat, there's an AI element there, right? I mean, literally, if they're even just crafting an email to their instructor, there's an AI element. And they're varying degrees of like what that means, how cognizant they are of that, right? I have a lot of conversations with schools around the fact that they struggle with their students understanding that Grammarly is AI. That's a very different AI, right, than like Open AI, or sorry, Chat GPT when you go to that page. So one thought is just that we need to be thinking about like this is like an AI ecosystem of experiences, but also that it's not just about certain specific things, right? And so much of what I think we see out in the media is about the educational part, about the cheating, but this relational question and relational part is really fundamental, I think. But the impacts are not as immediate, right? Like to say that like, you see the latest splashy headline about, there was an interesting one a couple months ago about a Berkeley professor who decided last minute to make his final exam be on paper and pencil, and his students did terribly after doing really well in the midterm, right? So that kind of stuff is splashy, and we hear a lot about that. But what does it mean to be interacting with a chatbot over and over again, particularly one that's sycophantic, right, for years that are formative for your social development, let alone these mental health questions, right? I mean, it is also splashy when you see a New York Times article about a student who tragically committed suicide after, deep and sustained engagement with a chatbot. But we also don't really know very well what that's like either when students are engaging with these chatbots in these ways. So, all this to say, like, first part, I think, is just that this is very complex. It's very also nuanced in a way that we don't always hear, I think, out there. And that feeds into then students don't always hear of it in that nuanced way either. And so another part, going back to the voice part, is to also not sit and assume that the things that we know are here are the things that they know are here. And so that's why I think it's really critical also to start with like, what are you understanding about AI? What does AI mean to you? How do you understand that it works? Where is AI in your life even? Because then we can start to understand what it's actually meaning for them and what ways they're engaging with it or understanding it. And so, even as I was just saying, it's in their world in all these like different ways, like that may not be what's central in on their mind or how they're experiencing it. And so I think that's also another reason why it's sort of a critical first step.
It's as I'm listening to you, it just jumps out to me that it makes so much sense what you're saying. Yet it's one of the last things we do as adults to think about from the child's perspective. So thank you for that. In our last few minutes, I want to hear both of you. And Amy, I'm not going to bring the slides back, but this whole aspect of curiosity, and we'll start with Amy because it was really interesting when you brought that up in our planning conversation.
Sure. Thank you. So, one thing that is a point of discussion around child development and early learning is their curiosity and interest in learning in general. That's a sign of healthy development. So we want kids to be curious, and we're also encouraging adults to be curious and non-judgmental and asking questions of their kids, and the discussions around what are you watching and seeing, what did you get from it, those kind of questions that Roxy mentioned earlier. So it's really important that we are both curious and having discussion and asking questions. But what kind of stuck with me recently is that we do tend to have we tend to be alarmed when we see our kids immediately going to ask Siri a question or immediately asking Google the answer to something, and they are engaging with AI in certain ways that we would typically say that that's healthy. Like they're curious and they want to learn something. So I just felt like there is a little bit of a tension between the fear the fear that a lot of adults have, because we do see those New York Times headlines that Gabriel mentioned, there is a lot to be concerned about, but we also can approach it in a relationship with the child, and we can talk about, oh, what did you like about that, or ask questions. We love to say, some things that adults can do is just ask kids, like, what's the funniest photo on your phone right now, or what was the best video you saw today. And that opens a very different conversation with the child, and I think that's just really mirrors what Dr. Velez was saying, is that if you ask them, if you're curious about their curiosity, I think it leads to a very different place, and it helps to actually strengthen the relationship.
Wow. And so the last 2 minutes, Dr. Velez, are yours. Comment on parents or anything that you might have missed.
So two things I would say. First, I just want to completely echo what Amy said. I think that's totally true. Curiosity, questions, and humor. AI opens a lot of space for thoughtful humor, right? But ways that can open totally different types of conversations. And I think that's fun. I did something with my kids a while back when they were asking it, where I think I had it create a picture of me as like I think it was a guinea pig or something, right? And like they laughed about that, but it was a way to space to open a conversation about what's it doing, what's happening here, and questions and curiosity and humor can be so powerful. The other thing I said, I keep talking about like listening to young people and the voice, and I just want to also say that it's hard, right? And I'm not sitting here saying that I do it perfectly. There are many times when I need to be better about that with my kids, with my students. I feel like it's a thing to be like a guideline and an aspiration and a process to keep in mind, but also, just like so much when we're dealing with real people in real lives, like it's a challenge. And and so, we do, I think, as adults and do as humans want to we are in our own heads, and it can be so hard to step out of that, and particularly in hot moments or difficult moments. But, it's something that is worth keeping there as that kind of guiding light.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you so much. And Amy, thank you always for all the research that you bring into this space. We are going to have a 5-minute break now, and we're going to come back and hear from youth in a beautiful video that they recorded. And then we're going to hear from our mental health practitioners. So be back at 11:10. Okay, everybody, I'm trusting that everybody is going to be returning. And right now, I want to introduce us to the next section of our meeting here. And it is a video that we're going to hear from three young people who recorded it for us. We have Kenai Volkman. She's a young person from Marshfield. Dean Swanland. He is a young person from McFarland. And Lydia Heslock, who is a young person from Pulaski. And they are going to be speaking to us their thoughts on artificial intelligence. So give me 1 second here. Share sound. And we keep our fingers crossed, right? Like this.
Youth thoughts on AI. How do you use AI?
My name is Lydia Cheslock. I am from the Green Bay area, and I think AI has been a huge factor in schools, especially within this last year. I personally do everything in my power to avoid using AI just because I don't like the concept of it, and I think that it's causing a lot more damage to our environment than we think. But I can speak on behalf of a lot of my peers who use it for almost anything, whether that be creativity-based posting on social media, or for advertisements for clubs, or even personal things like parties, grad parties, birthday parties, things like that. But it definitely gets abused in schoolwork. Whenever it comes to writing essays, or even filling out like a fill-in-the-blank assignment that we get handed out at school, I see so many of my peers run it through ChatGPT and have it auto-filled. It's constantly used for even the simplest of tasks, and I think it's really making an impact on students' efforts in school, and also not even just students being the ones that are using it. Definitely teachers I've seen use them as well, the different AI generators. But I think on students' parts and kids' parts, it is definitely being used. It's being advertised to us as, oh, it makes everything so much easier. Why not use this when it's available to you? But I think it's definitely taking a toll on kids' creativity or just their work ethics in general.
I'm Dean Swanland. I am from McFarland, which is in the Madison area. I have used AI very sparingly, only a couple times for stuff that I don't even remember, but I also really try to avoid it the best I can. I definitely agree that it is being used too easily and too frequently for very simple things like questions, advice, doing very simple tasks. And I also agree that it's a big problem in schools. We also need to shift the focus to other perspectives. And one of those that I think is very important is how teachers and educators are using AI. So some have used it for lesson plans, activity ideas, classroom management, general questions and stuff like that. But I know I have seen firsthand and also heard experiences of teachers using AI to grade students' work. And I don't know if that's something I can personally get behind. For me, it feels very much like a double standard for educators to be shaming students for using AI to complete assignments, but then for them to turn around and use AI to grade those same assignments. It just feels very two-faced to me.
My name is Kenai Volkman, and I'm from Marshfield, which is in Wood County, right in the middle of the state. And I do agree with both of them that AI has such a large impact on schools. I see it from both a good and bad side. So with on the good side, I'm seeing that the ways I use AI are definitely for instead of copying answers or looking up just prompts for essays and telling me how to answer those prompts, I kind of use it in a way to study for tests. So I say, give me review questions about this. And then I give it my response and say, how would you grade this? What do you think of this? Which kind of helps me get feedback rather than annoying my teachers with emails about different topics in class. But I do see a lot of my peers using it in a way rather than copying from other people in the class, just from copying it from ChatGPT or Gemini and things like that. I use Grammarly to like change the way that my email sounds so that it comes across in the way I mean it and can't be interpreted in a different way. But I do see how using AI in simple ways, like just like that, can change the way that we can think on our own, which isn't good.
AI companions.
People are also being a little careless with AI as they start talking to AI like it's their best friend and like they're sharing their deepest, darkest secrets. And I'm like, you are kind of violating your own privacy by sharing everything with AI. So like using AI as your therapist is honestly kind of concerning. It's like as a resource for mental health, I think there's a lot that can be explored there and that can be beneficial. But when you're just sharing private information, especially when you get into like medical records and stuff that like you have no control over once it's released, that's where you really have to be careful.
Students who may find it hard to make friends think that their AI is able to create a real friendship with them, and they think that they are being understood, and they think that this AI is listening to their feelings better than a real person could, and that's just not true. And that's something that can be very dangerous if continued like a habit, because I think what a lot of people don't understand is that these chatbots, these AI bots, are all algorithm based. They do not understand your feelings. That's exactly what it is. It's a program, it's a robot, and I think that that's something that can be harmful towards students and kids and adults, anyone who's using this as a substitute for talking to a real person. I think that's something that definitely needs to be talked about more. Creating human connections can't be replaced by talking to an AI.
What do you want adults to know about youth and technology?
We do notice how often it's being used. It's definitely noticeable among our peers, teens and kids, using it for day-to-day things, but we also do notice when adults use it, especially in educational settings like schools or even sports practices. I've seen coaches use AI to come up with drills. I saw my own school use it as a replacement for a choreographer in one of our theater programs, and that is crazy to me, having a robot take over the arts. But just generally, I want them to know that kids and teens do notice when adults use it as well.
We are actively viewing what are supposed to be our role models, actively doing what they're telling us not to do. So it's like, you're not going to convince kids to stay away from AI when you yourself are not staying away from it.
When my parents tell me at the dinner table, put your phone down, their phone is also down. But when all of like these, I'm seeing my friends' parents be like, you guys are always on your phone so much. And then they're just sitting there on their phones too. And that is such a impactful thing to be told one thing, but see a different thing. Our generation is the first generation that has grown up with technology our entire life. We were given iPads as 3-year-olds, given phones by middle school, and now we've got AI. Like, our parents didn't grow up like that. They didn't get their first phones until they were well into college, most likely. So when we have grown up with social media and constant screens, it's not something that adults in this time are used to. So when they're talking to us about our perspective, that's so much better than them just trying to make guesses about it themselves.
Adults think students and kids use it too much, but the kids are noticing that the adults do it as well. And it's just very counterproductive, especially when we have one group focused on the benefits and one group focused on the negatives. I think we need to take everything into account and try our best to get everyone on the same page.
It would help if I turned my stuff back on here, right? So great to hear from youth. And they just totally supported so much of what Gabrielle and Roxy both said, and Amy also. Now it is my absolute pleasure to introduce two mental health practitioners. People, I call this feet on the street, and we are so encouraged to have today Jess Springer, who is a director of school-based behavioral health services at North Lakes Community Clinic, and that's in Turtle Lake, Wisconsin. They have more locations, but she's in Turtle Lake. And we have Dr. Samia Khan, and she is the owner and psychotherapist at Wholehearted Wellness. And both Jess and Samia, again, they see young people, and we're going to ask them to share what they're seeing with these kids regarding technology and mental health. When I talked to them to plan the meeting, the list was so long that I'm going to ask to start in a kind of a specific way. And one of the things that really stood out to me was like the lack of normalizing of the lack of eye contact, that is getting to be so normalized, and the need for constant stimulation. So let's start with Jess on these things and more, and then we're going to hear from Samia.
Thanks. Yeah, I was trying to figure out where do I even start in trying to talk about that piece, because it's such a revolving element. But yeah, there's so many impacts on social skills that we've seen with technology. And of course, like from mental health, we see all the problem ones. So it's not to say there aren't positive pieces, but you know, we get the people who are struggling, and there tends to be more of those negative effects. So when we think about social skills, one of the main pieces is eye contact. Historically, that's always been a way to show respect. It's been a way to show that we're listening, we're engaged, and we have a connection, which of course is very different than if I was talking to you like this. It doesn't seem, you know, it immediately breaks a sense of connection. And so when we think of our younger generations talking with our older generations, who eye contact was everything, there's so much conflict in even just being able to have conversations, because our younger kids are used to not looking. We're checking our phone, or having an entire second conversation with somebody who's in front of us while I'm texting someone else, and that's normal. Or in all of our video virtual things, one of the beauties of technology, but like, how many of you were checking your email? How many of you were monkeying with things on your desk and not looking at the presenter who's looking at our faces to see if we're engaged? You know, we've become so accustomed to not having to look. And so the impact that we hear, as much as kids still know and they're used to not having to make eye contact, they still feel that disconnect that's occurring when people aren't looking at them. And what does that do if they're already struggling with self-esteem or not feeling important or whatever? So happy to hear all the comments about parents role modeling or not role modeling, and adults. These conversations are not unique to kids. We've seen this in all ages too. But yeah, I don't know. I can get lost in my head when I'm thinking about all of this, but
yeah. And so the list is long, and we'll pick up, some other things. But I really wanted to turn to Samia, and because you talked about an increase in neurodivergent and autistic diagnosis, a neurodivergent diagnosis and autistic symptoms. Can you explain that?
Yeah, definitely. So I attended a conference for ASACT a while ago, and a lot of researchers and people were talking about how they're seeing with the awareness of, hey, these are the symptoms to look out for in ADHD people, ADHD people, and autistic people. And at the same time, we're seeing the rise of technology and the social cue decline. So because we're not making eye contact. So how much of that is poor social skills, or even the idea that our neurobiology is changing because the more we receive something, it changes the way our brain then communicates. So where is that like intersect that's happening? And then how do we understand the intersect to be able to talk to parents about it and the adolescent of like, hey, these are the things you need to look out for, and these are the social things that you have to practice. And then how do you then intentionally practice those things?
Right. And you talked a little bit, because I was trying to press you on, is one causing the other? And we didn't really go there, but you talked about screens actually change your brain. And wondering if screens are causing it. Are we noticing it now more because kids are masking or were masking? Any thoughts along those lines?
So masking is also so much easier when you have a screen in front of you, right? Because like let's say if you get anxious, then you can quickly change like check your phone and fidget a little bit. So that way it can serve a really healthy purpose of like, hey, I'm disconnecting to regulate really quick, but then knowing like how much do you need to disconnect to be okay versus how much do you need to be present to be able to work through that distress tolerance of like, hey, this does feel uncomfortable, but how uncomfortable it is and how do I cope with that uncomfortability?
Great. And so, Jess, a couple other things on your very long list were the need to be entertained constantly, and technology removes our ability to problem solve. And I would love it if you would pick up on those two.
Yeah. The quickest and easiest thing I think about is like TikTok and the short videos and how that really locks our brain into needing constant entertainment. We can't handle being uncomfortable or slightly bored for like 5 seconds. And oh, no, that didn't entertain me. I'll swipe that. No, swipe that one. And I was talking to my daughter about this, and I was like, you can't just go to someone's face and be like, no, bored, swipe. No, don't like this situation, swipe. Like we can't do that in real life. So we're stuck standing in the line and in lunch, or they're in the car going a 2 mile drive down the road and not being able to just sit and look out the window or fidget with your hands or make conversation with someone in the car, perhaps, can't happen. They need the phone, they need the thing, they have to be entertained at all times. Or even watching a show. I think was it Dr. Etta, I think in there said something about like double dipping. I don't know, that's my phrase, maybe double dipping in screen time and having the TV on. And even as adults, we're so guilty of this watching our show. It's not even an ad. It's just maybe a lull in something. And oh, let me look at my phone and watch this quick while that, oh, no, that's entertaining. I'll go back to that. Just this constant search. And so, yeah, kids become so immediately dysregulated when they're a little bit uncomfortable or they don't have their security blanket of that phone or the screen. And so they're so much more anxious because they don't know that threshold, Samia, that you were just talking about of, okay, can I hold this discomfort for 5 seconds or is this too much and I really do need to regulate, dip out, dip back in without being disrespectful in that dip out. But yeah, and on the problem solving, I think our speakers in that video did really well when I think about AI and technology and just not having to think for ourselves. I don't even know that I can add anything more valuable than what they said. I think they said it all so beautifully. But we absolutely see that in our mental health work. And well, how do we problem solve this? What do we do? Like, I don't know. It's like, well, what do you mean you don't know? Like some of these things we think are so basic, but they're just stuck in, I don't know, I'll ask ChatGPT, I'll ask this. It's like, could you ask a real person maybe instead of defaulting to the easy, faceless interaction of technology? I don't know.
I think when we met, you said a scenario about, so we have a service person at our house and they say something and then we have to think and we have to react. And then it goes from there. And kids can't do that because they get the one answer. Yeah.
Yeah. The example I like to use is if I had to call and order a pizza, but you had to call and you had to ask them in person. You had to take their time, ask the specials, ask the pricing, pretend out an order, and then change your mind and go, oh, no, never mind. And take up their time and tell them no. Kids absolutely will not do that. And kids, I even mean people in our 20s. And that is rolling up rapidly through the ages. As older generations get more comfortable. I know this isn't about older generations though, but so they won't do that because face-to-face conversation has so many, even live conversation has so many pressures of, am I saying the right thing? Am I making the right face? Or where do I put my hands? Like, am I supposed to smile at that? There's so many things that need immediate decisions. And so people have really pulled away from interacting in any of those ways, even ordering food in a restaurant. So many kids nowadays really struggle to just say, can I have a cheeseburger and fries? They make their parent do it. They make their friend do it, or they won't get their driver's license. They won't get jobs because they can't handle the job interview and having to sit. Oh, there's so many.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to switch now. Samia, you work with parents. You say that you bring in parents into your work. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so a lot of times adults and parents, I know I've been guilty of that before too. We don't realize how much our kids absorb information from us and how they apply it to their daily life. So anytime I work with a preteen or a teen, I always tell parents in my consultation, like, you're going to end up in my office at some point, short term or long term. It's going to happen. You're going to have to accept that. Because if you don't come in and think about the behaviors that the kids that they're doing that's bothering you, how much of that is also coming from your behavior. So let's say if a parent comes home and it's been a long day and they're like on their phone scrolling because they need to wind down, but then they're mad at their teen for going into the basement and playing video games to wind down because they should be upstairs either like helping mom and dad doing something, all those things, right? So then that goes to the place of like, hey, if you're now modeling healthy coping, healthy behaviors and how you think a relationship with the screen should be, your kids are also learning from you. And that's going to create a disconnect between the two of you. Even if when you tell like something positive to them, something helpful to them, the brain's going to be like, but you also didn't do it in that manner. So how am I expect to do it in that manner? Because you are their role model, they are always going to learn from you. So then thinking about like, hey, this is what the kids are learning and how is this happening for you? Like, how did you learn that the way you're learning that? Or when you run into a problem, do you know you can approach your parents? And how do you approach your parents? For example, like Jess was saying, a lot of times when kids get dysregulated, they don't know how to like physically tell somebody that they're struggling. And oftentimes I'm seeing adolescents also like texting mom and dad, like, hey, I need something, but also not knowing how to tell them exactly what they need and what's happening in their body. So then sometimes I'm like, hey, let's come into the office. Let's talk about like, hey, how are we going to have these conversations? And then set boundaries for the full family of like, hey, this is the open discussion of this is what's going to fit for this age group, this is what's going to fit for us, and this is how we're going to abide by individually and as a family system together.
I'd also like you to pick up on parents demonizing themselves because they don't have it all figured out. I thought that was really intriguing when you talked about that.
Yeah, there's a lot of shame, right? Because there's so many adults who are now also getting diagnosed with neurodivergence later in life. So then they understand, like, hey, if I have struggled with it this much, then how did I do this to my child? And most parents tend to go inwards, right? Like, what did I do and what else could I have done? So then they start being mad at themselves or demonizing themselves. And that can also lead to the way that you talk to your child, right? The way we talk to ourselves reflects how we talk to others. So then if you're going to sit there and be mad at yourself for doing something that makes you feel like, okay, this is a bad relationship, then you're also modeling it for them. So you don't need to demonize yourself. So therefore, you're not also demonizing that behavior or that struggle that your child's going through, because then that child's also going to learn like, hey, there is something bad with me or there's something bad with technology. But it's really about like doing the dance like we've all been talking about.
Thank you. So Jess, I'm gonna jump back up here on my little list here. You and your colleagues were seeing more social anxiety and depression. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, and I think the social anxiety is definitely increased, just the prevalence of it. And a lot of it is because of like what I was saying, they don't have to learn the discomfort of live conversation. They can easily avoid it by ordering the pizza online instead of calling, or texting someone rather than speaking it to them. And when we think just messaging, we can pause. We can think, okay, is that really what I want to say? We could run it through chat GPT or whatever, is in the video to make sure it came out with all the best package before we hit send and have our words be vulnerable as we deliver them to someone else. It slows that down so much that being in live conversation with people, it's so vulnerable to know, am I making what am I doing the thing with my hands, like all of those things have to be so quick and instant decisions, and that feels there's so much pressure with it that they don't have to do it, and so they don't. And because then they're not doing it, they're not gaining the skills when they do need to sit down for a job interview or give a presentation. I love it when schools still make kids give presentations at school, to have a safe spot to practice some of those interactions. And then not to mention just how much our sense of society has broadened. So it isn't just the people in your school. In our, we're predominantly in rural schools, so it's a really different impact for our towns of 500 people, where okay, I have to compare myself to 40 people, maybe who are of my age group, and how do I fit in, and am I good enough in all the different ways? But then to compare that with billions across the entire earth. So that sense of comparison has really shifted, and it's comparison that's filtered. So rather than comparing to the people who you see in person in school, who, yeah, they might have some makeup on, or they might be, dressed in different ways, it's still their real selves versus the filter, literally the filters on Snapchat and all the things. And then they're comparing themselves even to other ages. Just, I don't know, it just explodes, and what that does to self-esteem. And then it has this, we naturally kind of retract and isolate. And we're social creatures, so we are not meant to be isolated in those ways. We are also not meant to be aware of everything that's happening in every country of the earth, and all the political things, and all of the wars, and all the violence, and all the things that matter. But our brain was meant to live in a cave and handle 20 people and one rival tribe. Like, we were not meant to know and handle the anxieties of our world. And so that can create a lot of shutdown, and then really fuels depression.
So
with that
Samia, so sorry. I see you nodding. Like, can you elaborate what you're seeing, the things that Jess is talking about that you're seeing in your practice?
Yeah, so much information on our fingertips and all at the same time. Our brain is literally not able to handle that. And that's why sometimes when people are like having multiple conversations, there's also so much chaos happening. So let's say if you had TikTok on like 5 minutes ago and you saw like some tragedy happen, then all of a sudden you're in class trying to learn, like, how are you expected to go from the screen that was so traumatizing and then have a conversation? So there's so much out there that's happening all at the same time. Then how do we process what we're taking in digitally and then be able to be present at the same time? It's just not that possible.
And as we look at our last couple of minutes here, Jess, I asked you a question when we met. Are you seeing this more in boys or girls or in different cultures? And you said no. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I guess it just, nothing giant stands out to me as, oh, this is very unique to males and this is very unique to females. Not saying that it isn't out there. There likely is. Some differences in what some people tend to struggle with more within it, but we've really just seen that the grand scheme of things, all youth have been impacted, whether it's urban or rural or races or genders, or like all been impacted in a lot of the same universal ways of how they problem solve, of the anxiety of, am I good enough compared to whichever group in whichever ways. And as much as it has really helped gain connections, it still has left so many with a deep sense of isolation and disconnect from other people. So I'd say in that way, it really is just across the board. And just that the impact of people not engaging in the world. They're not going outside. Like I said, we're rural, we're in the country. Our people go outside. We're supposed to be building forts and riding bike and hanging out. And everybody just kind of stay in their house. And so they lose a lot of that grounding element that happens with nature, and that happens with the physical movement of riding around the neighborhood or whatever. And just, yeah, and we have seen an equal amount of males and females in therapy. That is something that has really changed in the last 10 years as it's evened up.
Which is wonderful to hear. And so, Samia, we have like a minute. What are your final thoughts on all of this?
One other thought with the demonizing piece that I see a lot now that like a lot of my high school kids are going to college is when they started high school, COVID was happening, and that's also the time your brain is really learning how to socialize. And a lot of their socializing happened through media, through digital means, and then they were expected to then go back and be like, everything is dandy. So then we have to think about like, hey, we didn't really give you all of the tools because it was not possible, but now you're expected to be okay with it all. So we also have to think about like, hey, these are young brains that are learning, and the more we learn, the more they learn from us. So that is the dance we always have to think about like, hey, what are we exposed to all the time, and how does then come down to our behaviors and what's going to really help us, and then doing the dance of it.
Awesome, great. Thank you. Thank you, Samia. Thank you, Jess. It's such a neat opportunity to hear from people who are actually seeing our young people. And so now as we move into the last section of our meeting, which is an opportunity for you to have, for everybody in the space, to have a smaller group conversation with one of our speakers. So here are our rooms. In a minute, I'll open the rooms. You must select your own room. And that goes for the speakers too. You need to pick your room too, because we can't automatically assign you. But in our first room, we'll have the early years and with Dr. Roxy Etta and Linda Hall, you are going to be supporting in that room. Adolescent Wellbeing and Technology with Dr. Gabrielle Velez, and Amy Marsman will be in that room too. And Behavior Health Providers with Jess Springer and Dr. Samia Khan and Andrea will be in that room to support you. So let me, I lost my share screen. Andrea, can you get to the breakout rooms and open them?
Yep, I'll work on it.
Yeah, 'cause I can't stop